Close your eyes for a second and picture Hawaii. White sand beaches, crystal blue water, swaying palm trees, lays and sunsets, and the smell of plumeria in the warm island air. Now open them, because what I'm about to show you is the Hawaii that the travel brochures will never tell you about. A Hawaii carved from centuries of war, sacrifice, and ancient spiritual power. A Hawaii where the gods are not myths, they're present. Where the dead march in formation down the highway at night. Where the jungle swallows people. Where the land itself was soaked in so much blood that it has never fully dried. Tonight we go to 3 places in Hawaii where paradise ends and something ancient and terrifying begins. Places where locals, people who have lived there their entire lives, will not go after dark. Not because they're superstitious, because they know better. This is Hawaii's most haunted places. Don't say I didn't warn you. In Wanu Pali Lookout and the Pali Highway, where the warriors fell. There are places in this world where history didn't just happen. It embedded itself into the land permanently. Where you can stand on a patch of ground and feel, in your bones, that something enormous and terrible occurred here. That the earth absorbed it and never let it go. The Wanu Pali Lookout on Oahu is one of those places. The year is 1795. King Kamehameha I, one of the most powerful and ruthless military leaders in Pacific history, is waging his campaign to unite all of the Hawaiian Islands under his rule. His final obstacle on Oahu is the army of Chief Kalanikupule. The two forces meet in the Wanu Valley, and Kamehameha's army drives Kalanikupule's warriors back, further and further, up into the narrow mountain pass. Up toward the cliffs, up toward the edge of a 1,000-foot drop into the valley below. The warriors had nowhere left to go. Some jumped, some were pushed. Hundreds of men went over the edge of Wanu Pali, screaming, falling, dying on the rocks below. When workers were constructing the Pali Highway in 1898, they found over 800 skulls at the base of the cliff. 800, just stacked there, waiting to be discovered a century later. Those men never received proper burial rites. In Hawaiian spiritual tradition, that matters enormously. A soul that is not properly honored does not move on peacefully. It lingers, it wanders, it returns. And at Wanu Pali, they returned as something with a name. In Hawaiian spiritual tradition, the Huakai, the night marchers, are the spirits of ancient warriors and alii, royalty, who march in procession after dark, following the ancient paths they walked in life. They carry torches, they beat drums, they chant, and they move with absolute, terrifying purpose. The rules around the night marchers are not folklore. To Hawaiian people, they're sacred warnings passed from generation to generation. If you hear the drums approaching, run, get inside, and do not look up. If a night marcher recognizes you as a descendant, as Ohana, they will pass you by. If they do not recognize you, you do not survive the encounter. The Pali Highway cuts directly through the path the night marchers are said to travel. And locals do not drive it alone after dark. The most famous phenomenon on the Pali Highway involves cars. Dozens, perhaps hundreds, of drivers over the decades have reported their vehicles dying completely in the middle of the highway. No warning, no engine trouble before or after. The car simply stops, and then, after a period of time, it starts again on its own, as if whatever stopped it has passed. Mechanics who've examined these vehicles find nothing wrong. No electrical fault, no fuel issue, nothing. One Oahu resident, A construction worker who drove the highway regularly for his job described pulling over one night because his headlights began flickering violently. He said he sat in the darkness and heard it, faint at first, then growing louder. The rhythmic sound of drums and what he described as many feet marching in unison on the road beside his truck. He did not look. He lay down across his front seat and did not move. The sound passed. When he sat up, his headlights were working perfectly. He found a different route to work the next day. A family driving home from a late dinner and reported that their GPS, functioning perfectly before and after, went completely haywire on the Pali stretch, spinning in circles, showing their location as somewhere in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. Their radio cut to static. Their youngest child, who had been asleep in the back seat, woke up and calmly said, "The men with the fire are walking." She fell back asleep immediately. She had no memory of saying it in the morning. There is one more layer to the Pali Highway legend, and this one people still test today, sometimes with consequences. Local tradition holds that you must never carry pork over the Pali Highway. The belief is rooted in the rivalry between Kamapoe, the pig demigod, and Pele, the goddess of volcanoes, whose spiritual territory the highway crosses. To bring pork through is to invite a confrontation between divine forces that humans were never meant to be caught between. The stories of what happens to people who ignore this warning are remarkably consistent. Cars breaking down on the road in the dark, and it will not start again until the pork is removed from the vehicle and left on the roadside. A group of college students decided to test this, filming it for social media. They loaded up with pulled pork sandwiches and drove the highway at night, laughing the whole way. Halfway through, their car died completely. The guys laughed at first, but then the laughter stopped. Their phones lost signal, and the lights in the car started flickering. They threw the food out the window, and the car started immediately. The Nuanapali is not just a haunted road. It is a corridor between the world of the living and the world of the dead. And the dead here are warriors. They are powerful, and they're not interested in being disrespected. Wahia, the town that darkness built. Most people who visit Oahu never make it to Wahiawa. It's in the center of the island. No beaches, no resorts, no tourist attractions listed in the guidebooks. Just a quiet plantation town sitting in the middle of the red-soiled pineapple and sugarcane fields of central Oahu. But the people who live in Wahiawa know something that outsiders don't. They know what's in those fields at night. To understand why Wahiawa is haunted, you have to understand what happened here during the plantation era of the 1800s and early 1900s. The sugarcane and pineapple industries that built Hawaii's economy were built on the backs of laborers, brought from Japan, the Philippines, China, Korea, and Portugal, who worked in conditions that can only be described as brutal. These workers toiled in the blazing Hawaiian sun from before sunrise to sunset. They lived in cramped plantation camps, were paid barely enough to survive, and had almost no rights or protections. Many died from accidents, illness, and exhaustion in those fields. Their bones are in that red soil, their grief soaked into it for over a century. The neighborhood of Whitmore Village sits on the edge of the old plantation fields, and it has one of the most persistent and well-documented paranormal reputations on the entire island. Residents here, not tourists, not ghost hunters, but people who have lived here for decades, describe the same phenomena with striking consistency. Shadow figures moving through the fields at night. Not vague shapes or tricks of the light, but solid, human-shaped silhouettes moving purposefully between the rows of crops. One longtime Whitmore Village resident described watching from her bedroom window as a child as a line of dark figures moved through the field across the street. She counted 7 of them before she ran to get her mother. When her mother looked out the window, the figures were gone. Her mother told her, quietly, "Don't watch them. They don't like being watched." She said her mother spoke as if she already knew exactly what they were. Multiple residents and workers in the Wahiawa area have reported hearing voices coming from the empty fields, particularly at night and in the early morning hours before sunrise. Not the kind of voice you could mistake for wind or animals. Words in multiple languages: Japanese, Ilocano, Cantonese, the languages of the plantation workers who died in these fields generations ago. A security guard who patrolled a pineapple processing facility near Wahiawa in the early 2000s submitted a story to a paranormal research group years after leaving the job. He described making his rounds one night and hearing a full conversation, multiple voices speaking in what he later identified as Tagalog, coming from a completely empty section of the warehouse floor. When he turned on the lights, the voices stopped instantly. He said the silence that followed felt louder than the voices had been. He finished his shift and never returned. In the center of Wahiawa sits one of the most powerful and controversial sacred sites in all of Hawaii, the Wahiawa Healing Stones. These are ancient basalt stones that Hawaiian tradition holds to be imbued with tremendous mana, spiritual power. For generations, native Hawaiians brought the sick and suffering to these stones to be healed. But mana, in Hawaiian spiritual tradition, is not inherently benevolent. It is power, raw, ancient, and indifferent to human intentions. The stones have been vandalized, moved, and disrespected over the decades, and those who have done so describe the consequences in remarkably similar terms. Overwhelming misfortune, physical illness, and the persistent feeling of being followed, even after leaving Wahiawa far behind. A construction crew that attempted to move the stones in the 1920s abandoned the job after multiple workers became violently ill within hours of touching them. The stones were returned to their original position and workers got better. The illnesses cleared. The stones have not been moved since. Wahiawa doesn't advertise its darkness. It doesn't need to. The people who live there carry it with them, in the stories their grandparents told them, in the way they close their curtains at night, in the quiet understanding that in those red fields, something remains. The old Pali Road, the jungle that doesn't want you there. There's a road in Hawaii that the government closed. Not because it was unsafe structurally, not because of traffic concerns. They closed it and they let the jungle grow, and most officials, when asked why hikers are discouraged from exploring it, give vague answers about preservation and liability. But the people of Oahu know the real reason. The old Pali Road does not want visitors, and it has ways of making that known. Before the modern Nuuanu Pali Highway was built, there was the old Pali Road, a narrow, winding stretch of pavement that cut through the dense rainforest jungle of the Nuuanu Valley. It was the only route over the Ko'olau Mountains for decades. Generations of Oahu residents drove it, walked it, and feared it. When a new highway opened, the old road was closed and largely left to nature. Today it exists as a crumbling, overgrown trail running through some of the densest jungle on Oahu, technically accessible to hikers, but heavily discouraged, and sections of it are outright closed. The official reason is safety. The unofficial reason is that too many people come back different. The single most reported experience on the old Pali Road, documented across decades, across different types of people, in accounts that match each other with uncanny precision, is spatial disorientation on a path that goes in a straight line. Hikers describe setting off down the road, walking for what feels like 20 or 30 minutes, and then finding themselves back at the exact spot where they started, with no memory of turning around, no recollection of retracing their steps. Simply back at the beginning. This has happened to solo hikers and groups alike. It has happened to experienced outdoors people who have hiked all over the world. It has happened in broad daylight on a clear, straight, visible path through the jungle. A hiking group of 4 people, 2 of them experienced trail guides, documented their experience in detail in 2018. They marked their starting point with a piece of orange tape on a tree. They walked for what their watches confirmed was 34 minutes in a straight direction. They rounded a curve in the road and found themselves standing in front of a tree with a piece of orange tape on it. They could not believe they were back from where they started when they saw a tree with the orange tape. They left immediately and did not discuss it until they were back on the main highway. But the disorientation, unsettling as it is not the most disturbing thing people encounter on the old Pali Road. Multiple hikers on separate visits in separate years with no connection to each other have reported hearing the sound of children crying from deep within the jungle on either side of the road. Not playing, not laughing, but crying. The cries of a child who is lost and frightened. Every person who has reported this describes the same feeling of overwhelming, almost a physical urge to leave the path and go into the jungle toward the sound, to go look for the child and help. Every person who has reported feeling this urge has also felt the urge to resist, and are grateful they did. Because the crying, they say, never gets closer no matter how long you walk. It stays at the same distance, leading you off the path and deeper in a jungle so dense that getting lost would be genuinely dangerous. Whether what they heard was a spirit, an echo of something ancient, or was something else entirely, no one can say. But the consistency across independent accounts spanning decades is impossible to dismiss. Native Hawaiian spiritual practitioners, kahunas, speak about the old Pali Road area with a respect that borders on reverence. This stretch of valley, they explain, sits at a convergence of spiritual pathways, the same routes the night marchers travel, layered over land that was already considered deeply sacred long before the Battle of 1795. To enter it without proper spiritual preparation, they say, is not just dangerous. It is disrespectful, and the land responds to disrespect. One kahuna, who was interviewed by a local Hawaiian news outlet, described the old Pali Road this way. That place is a door. Most doors you can walk through and come back, but not this one. He did not elaborate. He didn't need to. The old Pali Road is still there today. People still hike it despite the warnings, because people always think the rules don't apply to them. Some people visit that orange tape tree and understand that for the first time in their lives, there are places in this world that exist outside of human control. Outside of our understanding. Places that were here before us, and will be here long after we're gone. Three places, one island, and a reminder that paradise is never the whole story. Nuwana Pali, where 800 warriors went over a cliff and never stopped marching, where the road itself bends to the will of the dead. Wahiawa, where a century of suffering soaked into red plantation soil, and the workers who died in those fields have never punched out for the last time. And the old Pali Road, where the jungle plays tricks, children cry from somewhere you can never reach, and a door stands open that you very much do not want to walk through. Hawaii is one of the most beautiful places on Earth. I mean that completely. But beauty and darkness are not opposites. In Hawaii, they have always lived side by side. If you've been to any of these places, if you've driven the Pali at night, or heard something in the Wahiawa fields, or walked the old road and found yourself somewhere you didn't expect? Tell me in the comments. Your story belongs in this conversation. If you're planning a trip to Hawaii, make sure you visit one of these places. Subscribe for more haunted places from across the country, and I'll see you in the next one.